Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. The moment we have been waiting for, the man of the hour behind this fantastic event, President Bill Clinton. Oh, you're great.
I was backstage getting permission to bring my coffee. Thank you.
So I just want to point out that CGI has facilitated more than 2,300 commitments in 180 countries to date. When fully funded, these commitments are valued at more than $73 billion.
That's serious money.
Mr. President, thank you for continuing your good work well beyond being in office.
Thank you.
So we just had a wonderful conversation with a number of entrepreneurs and CEOs, and I want to ask you a few news questions before I get back into CGI. One thing that kept coming up with our panel is government getting in the way and stopping the entrepreneurialism. Here we are on the eve of potentially another government shutdown. Jack Lew, Treasury Secretary, says this country will run out of money in the next 3 weeks if we are not raising the debt ceiling. What do you think are the implications of a government shutdown? And what do you think is the reality of this?
Well, in reality, since we have had some practice with this, I don't mean we the royal we, I mean we the United States. We had 2 government shutdowns when I was president. And the first one was about to get really bad. So the second time when they shut the government down, they left a lot of essential services there, and we sort of managed our way through it, but it's a lousy way to run a railroad. And, you know, shutting down national parks and killing families' family vacation when that's the only thing they can afford to do, for example, is not a very good thing to do. And there are other more severe things. But the most significant negative thing about a government shutdown now would be this is coming not at a time like it did in '96 when the economy's picking up and the deficit's going down and people think we're going in the right direction anyway.
Things were good.
Yeah, and it was still bad. If you do it now when people are hoping to goodness these market trends are net positive and it looks like we're really coming out of this and it looks like America's going to have a little bit higher growth this year than was originally prepared, people will, investors, particularly investors from overseas, will think we are, in the parlance of my childhood, 3 bricks shy of a full load. They will think we have lost our mind. They will think, you know, how can you have, first of all, most countries don't require the Congress to vote twice on spending. That's what this does. It's basically, they've already voted to spend this money. So under our system, which other countries don't do, they have to vote again to borrow the money to cover the spending they've already voted for. So that creates an opportunity, since it always sounds bad, raising the debt ceiling. In normal times, nearly every member of Congress has at one time or another voted against raising the debt ceiling because it gives you the opportunity to stand on the floor of the Congress and make a speech about a particular thing that you strongly disagree with. Senator McCain, for example, used to use this as an opportunity to talk about some defense spending that he thought was wasteful. That's fine. But to do it as a strategy to actually stop from paying America's bills is disastrous.
Right.
And we have worked so hard to get this country back from what happened in 2008. We have clawed our way back. We've been up and down and up and down. And the whole rest of the world is too. And they're looking at us in Mexico, our neighbors, which are having a tough year. Our neighbor Brazil, which is
even tougher.
Yeah. And then people, here's Japan really adopting an aggressive, sensible economic strategy and trying to get women in the workforce so it actually will work. There'll be enough bodies there to implement the strategy. And they'll think, what is America doing?
Right. What's the
Why have they opted out of their responsibilities to lead the global economy? And it'll hurt us long run. If you were an investor in Asia or Europe, you'd be more reluctant in the future to invest in our country if we pull a stunt like this.
How is it possible that you managed to produce 4 balanced budgets and welfare reform and negotiate with the other side bring everyone together, and we have this inability to come together.
Well, let's. Part of it is the moving of the parties, particularly the Republican Party. There's been lots of analysis that says that if you take the average votes when I was president as the political center of America, it is true that the Democrats have moved a little more liberal than that, but the Republicans moved far to the right of that. I'll give you just one example being debated today. They want to use this debt ceiling to dramatically cut food assistance, the food stamp program. Now, spending's already down some because the economy's getting better. But there are a huge number of people who are working but could only get low-paying jobs in the aftermath of the crash, who have children at home, and they want to take a big cut out of that. We got welfare reform because the Republicans twice wanted to do that. They wanted to block grant food stamps and Medicaid to the states, so I twice vetoed it. Then we did what grown-ups do. I gave them something they wanted, which was a 5-year hard limit on aggregate welfare eligibility, and they gave me something I wanted, which is not to include food and medicine and health care in welfare reform. And we made an honorable compromise, and the world was better off for it. I had even one of the people who resigned from my administration in protest because he thought I'd made a mistake later said in introducing me at a speech at Harvard that he thought I was right and he was wrong, that on balance welfare reform had really worked. Why? Because you got the best people from the right, the best people from the left. We thought about it, we argued about it, and we made a deal. And so that's a real problem. In the House, this is complicated by reapportionment. You know, that, well, because the districts are increasingly partisan. And so Republicans and Democrats now have to worry more about being defeated in a party primary, especially the Republicans, than losing a general election.
That makes sense.
And it's really skewing the ability to just make a deal. I know people make a deal sounds bad, but the truth is that's what Democratic politics is. It's a game of let's make a deal every single day, and it ought to be viewed as an honorable thing.
What do you think the deal should be? What should President Obama give on, and what should the Republicans? I mean, I think what you're saying is the Republicans should get off of this. You know,
I think, first of all,
ceiling.
You can't allow the full faith and credit of the United States to be messed with. So if I were in his position, I'd be taking the exact position he's taking.
Not negotiable.
No, not that. I would say we can still negotiate a long-term budget deal, and I'd still like to do it, and I put more budget cuts on the table for you, and we can do that. But the place to do that is when we're doing this. Once you vote to spend the money, you can't say we're not going to pay the bills. We just spent the money. You can't say I'm going to vote against a bill that authorizes the Treasury to sell bonds so we can pay for the things that you already voted to spend money on.
One of the cutbacks that people talk about is cutting back on defense spending. At a time when we have more upset in the world, post-Syria, now we have an opportunity, if you believe what you're reading, that Iran perhaps could be wanting to be diplomatic. Do you believe this? What do you think? How do you think this plays out with Iran?
I don't know. I think that it ought to be tested. And it's obvious that testing it creates decision-making opportunities and burdens for everybody involved, because anything we do with Iran affects the security of the people who are struggling in Syria, affects the security of Lebanon, and it darn sure affects the future of Israel. And therefore it affects the United States. So what I think should be done is to follow the rule of all uncertain but important things in foreign affairs. Work for the best, prepare for the worst. But if you get to the point where you only prepare for the worst, then you assume failure before you start. If you go off all happy-talky and you don't prepare for the worst, then if it doesn't work out, you wind up with egg on your face. So, and with possible adverse circumstances. So, I think we're handling it pretty well. But if you look at the president of Iran, he's in a pretty difficult situation too, because, they were thinking about how much of an opening the presence of the president and the Iranian president here at the same time, and all of their entourages and cabinets and all that stuff created. And at the last minute, it appears that it was the Iranians, not the Americans, who decided that whatever goes on back home was too much of a load to permit that. But so what I would do is I'd keep the door open. I'd keep testing the Russians and the Syrians on this chemical weapons thing. I'd try to get that done and have it certified. And I'd say, it doesn't make a lick of sense for you to give up chemical weapons and keep killing just as many of your citizens with conventional weapons. It's time to go back to the peace process. We started the peace process way back when Hillary was Secretary of State, that they want to revive now. And the president is right about this. Syria should be settled with a negotiation because it's so complicated. You got Sunni, you got Shia, you got the Alawites, you got a huge Kurdish population. They all need to be in the mix when this is over if you don't want war to break out again.
Should he have handled it differently? The president was criticized over first coming out, setting that red line, and then saying, well, let's wait for Congress. In retrospect, what could have been done better? Knowing that the people do not want war.
Yeah, well, he could have used air power sooner, but it turned out, for whatever reasons, it may have all worked out for the best, because Mr. Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, is a very clever man. So he goes to Secretary Kerry and he says, oh, let's don't do this. How can we make it go away? So John Kerry said the only answer America could give now that the red line had clearly been crossed and the UN was about to issue a report saying there's no way anybody but the Syrian government used chemical weapons. So he said, well, give up the chemical weapons. I mean, I'm sure he didn't think there was a chance in the world anybody'd say anything. So Lavrov and Putin said, okay, let's do that. Now, a lot of people say, oh, this is a great victory for Russian propaganda. It makes America look bad. I just disagree with that. First of all, the only reason they're doing it, or one big reason they're doing it, is they did not want America to assert air power into the equation, because they were giving the Syrian government weapons. They got the Iranian troops in there. They got the Lebanese Hezbollah in Syria fighting. So they thought they were shifting the balance away from the rebels. And I think Putin is a smart man, and he can walk and chew gum at the same time, which is a good thing. That is, he can think about more than one thing. And I think that he believed he's got to be disturbed about all these al-Qaeda-related groups interfering in the Syrian conflict and complicating life. He's got to be worried about the prospect of massive stocks of chemical weapons that may not be subject to control, because he's got restive Muslim populations on Russia's southern border. So it was a messy process, all right, but it might work out well for us. At least we've got Russia and Syria now in a public arena of accountability. So if this turns out to be a scam, they can't blame it on anybody else. It's right out there and for everybody to see. So I think the pressure on them to deliver is high. And if they do deliver and they get rewarded for it, which they should, people should say attaboy, then the pressure will build to go back to the peace process. Because it won't take 72 hours before the world will be disgusted. They say, I gave up my chemical weapons. Now please let me bomb all these people. I got these other bombs. I think I'll kill them with this. So I think we just have to keep pushing. This is messy, but we've got some leverage here. We just need to keep pushing. Is
Putin our friend? I mean, first he said, look, if you do any military action, I am going to be backing the Syrians.
But he's already backing the Syrians. He flies weapons in there all the time. Yeah, he thinks it's in his interest. But I think what happened was, for several years, he's been on automatic. That is, whatever makes America mad is good for us. If I can make them look bad, I look good. If I can make them look frustrated and weak, I look strong.
Let me ask you.
Wait a minute. Don't believe that. The average male life expectancy in Russia is under 60.
Why is that alcohol? What is that?
No. Well, it may be some of that, but I don't want to get into that.
Okay.
Their healthcare system collapsed with their economy when the Soviet Union ended, and started before then, and they haven't built it back. You can't build a modern economy on natural resource wealth, no matter how much you've got, if the prices vary and you don't take the profits you make from oil and gas sales and put it into building a modern, diverse economy. You can't build a modern economy if you have too much authoritarianism and a lot of your brightest kids are scared to get on the internet, and a lot of others get out of town and go someplace else and bring their brains. Russia's economy should be based on the fact that every year in the international computing contests with lots of scores and scores of universities, there are always 2 Russian universities in the top 5. That's the key to Russia's future. And so I think Putin may be rethinking some of his strategy. He has milked this anti-American cow about as long as he can milk it, and there's not very much advantage in his being wrong-sided in Syria and ignoring the long-term strategic threats to Russia from chemical weapons sloshing around in his region.
As you wrap up CGI the next day and a half, talk to us about where the real need is in the world. $73 billion in fully funded commitments. Well, where is that money, those resources, best used?
First of all, the answer will be different in different places. But in the short run, remember the Arab Spring's beginning. Remember Tahrir Square. You had some of the most articulate young people I've ever seen in my life. And they were part of hordes of people. The Egyptian university system every year produces 400,000 graduates. The Egyptian economy produces nowhere near 400,000 jobs for university graduates. There is a global jobs shortage. That leads to a global income crisis because people don't make as much money for jobs as they would if the labor markets were tight and constantly growing, that is, changing in composition. So I believe the things that are likely to both train people for jobs they will be able to get, to upgrade dramatically the quality of agricultural production by small farmers, to increase access to technology in the way that grows jobs, to create access to capital for entrepreneurs, which a lot of our participants do. Anything that creates employment and business startups is the most important thing in the short run. When people can make a living, all the other problems recede. And now we have a global jobs and incomes crisis, which you see in the United States, you see in the Arab countries, which is a lot of what turns the Arab Spring into an Arab storm, but you see it everywhere. You see, I mean, even in Japan, you have more inequality, more unemployment than you used to have, more sluggish growth. It's why people are so excited about Prime Minister Abe. So that's the most important thing. And so when we evaluate our energy projects, which account for a lot of the money because they're more expensive if it's a big solar thermal project or something like that, you have to ask yourself, where is this going to create jobs and what will happen? There are lots of, we probably save more lives with our healthcare initiatives. We probably brighten the future more with our education initiatives. But if you're asking me today, on this day, the global jobs and incomes crisis is what has got the world in knots.
Thank you for moving the needle on girls and women, by the way. Peter Sands just announced to the crowd his commitment today. Why is this so important to CGI year after year, women and girls?
Because in an interconnected, interdependent world, where brain power and back power count, it is not only dumb, not only immoral, it is dumb to leave half the world out of the equation. And because there's almost no place in the world where women enjoy equal participation and equal remuneration in the economy and equal involvement in the political life of a country. Rwanda is the only country in the world that has a majority of its parliament female. You know, we want a pat on the back when 20% of the Senate is female. And even in America, after all these years, we now know that we're a long way from pay equity. The average woman earns about 77 cents for every dollar a man earns in a similar job. So the empowerment of women and girls is important. The other thing is we're trying to feed 7 billion people. We're trying to manage the water needs of 7 billion people. We'll soon be feeding and managing the water needs of 9 billion people. Even the people who deny climate change accept the fact that that's going to be a difficult thing. The only way to slow the rate of population growth that is morally acceptable in all religions, all cultures, and all regions is to put every girl in the world in school and give every young woman access to the labor market. It always delays the rate of age of first marriage and the number of babies families have. The most empowering thing we could do for women is the only morally acceptable way to slow the population growth.
I love it. You've mentioned Japan. Final question here. You've mentioned Japan a few times. Do you think the stimulus is going to work? Do you think the economy will, in fact, turn for the first time in 20 years?
I do. But it is not sustainable because the Japanese, like me, are getting old. That is, they're an old population, and it's a tribute to their health habits and their health system. But they don't have many babies. Their birth rate is very low. And they don't want to take a lot of immigrants now. They're going to have to get over that. But it's going to take them a while to get over that. This is a deeply ingrained cultural thing, and there's a lot of history there in North Asia and the wars and all that. But the women of Japan can buy them 20 years of economic growth to make the adjustment to either increase the birth rate or have more immigrants, because their labor force participation is so low. So if you just move all these, then they're already well educated. If we can move more of them into the workforce, then Prime Minister Abe will have enough ready bodies and ready minds for his economic strategy to work. And look, folks, we should all want this. They're an astonishing people. I went to Japan more times than any president's ever been, and I got really impatient when people said Japan was going to bury us in the 80s, and then I got really impatient when people said Japan has become irrelevant in the 90s. It is a unique, brilliant, gifted culture, and we should be pulling for them to come back. But they got to get their women in the workforce to make it work.
Mr. President, thank you for your leadership. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.